The crystal dome of the Galactic Council Chamber caught light from three suns and scattered it in directions that had no names in human languages. Ambassador Nara Voss had been sitting beneath that dome for 9 years, and she had never found it beautiful. She found it precise. The way a weapon was precise. The way a courtroom was precise. The specific aesthetic of a space designed to communicate power while appearing to communicate only order. She sat in the human delegation section, which was smaller than it should have been and positioned lower than it should have been. And she waited for the session to begin with the patience of someone who had learned that patience was the only currency that compounded. Behind her sat 4 members of Earth's diplomatic staff. They were quiet. They had learned in the years of working with her that she did not want conversation before a session. She wanted the specific quality of attention that came from silence, the reading of a room before it spoke, the assessment of posture and position, and the 100 small signals that told you where the weight of the chamber was before a single word was said. Today, the weight was with the Vorthak. She could feel it in the way the other delegations positioned themselves, the slight lean away from the human section, the careful neutrality of species that had already calculated the likely outcome and decided which side of it they preferred to be seen on. The Krex elders were clicking their approval of something that had not yet been said. The insected Zac species were in the specific formation that indicated collective readiness. Even the Crystalline Union, usually independent, had moved their seating position 2 degrees toward the Vorthak section in a shift so subtle it would have been invisible to anyone who had not been mapping the chamber's geometry for 9 years. Voss had been mapping it for 9 years. The session opened with the usual protocols, the acknowledgements, the recording activations, the formal recognition of Speaker Valdrin, who floated at the center of the chamber in his energy form with the comfortable authority of a being who had been running these proceedings for 3,000 years, and had never encountered anything that required him to update his assumptions about what proceedings were for. The Council recognizes Commander Verktas of the Vorthak Empire. The Vorthak commander rose. He was 9 feet of scarred red skin and bone crests, and the specific physical quality of a species that had never needed to pretend to be dangerous. His ritual scars were documented. Voss had read the intelligence file, and they told a story of 40 years of campaigns that had ended in the same way. His uniform cost more than the annual salary of most humans on the outer colonies. He held himself the way the chamber's architecture held itself, as though the idea of anything going otherwise had never required consideration. Honored Council, Verktas's voice moved through the translation system and emerged with the specific resonance of formal Vorthak address, the register used for proclamations rather than conversations. The Vorthak Empire brings a matter of great importance before this body. The humans have claimed mining rights to 17 systems in the outer spiral. These systems contain resources that rightfully belong to established members of this council. Murmurs from the gallery, Voss noted their direction. The Vorthak Empire has maintained protective oversight of these systems for 8 centuries. We have committed blood and resources to ensure their stability against piracy and external threat. These newcomers claim entitlement through paperwork. We claim entitlement through sacrifice. The Council must recognize that there is a hierarchy to these claims. More murmurs. The Krex were clicking. The Zac were buzzing in the harmony register that indicated agreement. The Vorthak Empire therefore demands that the human delegation withdraw its claims to all 17 systems within 30 standard days. It demands acknowledgement that junior species do not challenge the claims of established powers. And it demands that the humans understand their proper position within the hierarchy of galactic civilization. The chamber fell into the specific silence of a room that had just watched someone say the quiet part with full volume. Voss stood. The Council recognizes Ambassador Voss of Earth. She walked to the speaking platform. The walk was not long, but she took the full time of it because the walk was also a communication, and she had learned to communicate in every medium available. She looked calm because she was calm, in the specific way of someone who had been preparing for this conversation for 3 years and had arrived at the place where preparation became readiness. The 17 systems in question were unclaimed territory according to galactic law, she said. Earth followed every procedure required for exploration claims. We conducted mineral surveys, filed our findings with the Council registry, and paid the filing fees that this Council established for exactly this purpose. She paused. The Vorthak Empire chose not to file claims on these systems in 800 years of, as the commander puts it, protective oversight. Galactic law does not recognize protection as a property right. It recognizes paperwork. We filed the paperwork. Verktas's bone crests flared. Laws, you speak of laws. The Vorthak Empire has spilled blood for those systems. I understand that, Voss said, and I have genuine respect for what it costs to maintain order in volatile space. But the Vorthak Empire chose to spend that blood without establishing the legal framework that would have protected its investment. That was a choice, made over 8 centuries, by people with full access to the Council's property claim procedures. She looked directly at him. Earth is not obligated to compensate the Vorthak Empire for a decision Earth did not make. You think your paperwork means more than Vorthak honor? I think Voss said carefully that when species join this council, they agree to resolve disputes through the mechanisms this council provides. The Vorthak Empire joined this council 400 years ago. Honor claims that existed before that membership cannot supersede the legal framework you agreed to on joining. She paused. If the Vorthak Empire wants to challenge our claim, the council has an arbitration process. We will participate in that process. We will abide by its outcome. That is what council membership means. The chamber erupted. Verktas's voice rose above the noise. The Vorthak Empire issues this ultimatum. The humans will withdraw their claims to all 17 systems within 30 standard days. They will pay compensation for the insult to Vorthak honor. They will acknowledge that junior species do not challenge their betters, or they will learn what it costs to ignore us. Voss stood at the speaking platform and let the chamber noise move around her. She waited for it to reduce, not to silence, but to the level where she would be heard clearly, and then she spoke. Earth rejects this ultimatum. The chamber went quieter. We will not abandon legal claims because they are threatened. If we did, we would be establishing the precedent that legal claims are negotiable under military pressure. That is a precedent we will not set. Then you will be taught, Verktas said. Speaker Valdrin pulsed with concern. Commander Verktas, the Council strongly advises against military action over territorial disputes. There are established channels. The Vorthak Empire has used your channels for 50 years, Verktas said. We have watched while species that never bled for anything claim the rewards of our sacrifice. The humans will withdraw their claims and pay tribute or face the consequences. 30 days. He turned and walked from the chamber, followed by the Vorthak delegation, their footsteps marking the silence. Valdrin floated down toward Voss. Ambassador, perhaps it would be wise to reconsider. The Vorthak are passionate about matters of honor, surely some compromise. Speaker Valdrin, Voss said, if Earth backs down from a legal claim because of a military threat, we have communicated to every species in this council that our legal claims are negotiable under pressure. That communication would be permanent. Every future claim we make, every future dispute we enter would be colored by it. She gathered her materials. We will not compromise on this. I want that recorded as well. It was recorded. The session closed. The galaxy waited in the comfortable assumption of people who had seen this kind of dispute resolve itself 100 times before for the negotiated settlement that would follow. New Geneva was a colony of 90,000 people in the outer spiral. It had been established 30 years ago by the second wave of human colonization, during the period when Earth's expansion into the outer systems was still new enough to feel like adventure rather than administration. The colony had grown into something that had its own character, agricultural, close-knit, with the specific culture of people who had chosen to live at the edge of human space because they preferred the particular quality of life it offered. Children grew up knowing the names of the families who had founded the colony. There were festivals for the harvest cycles. The hospital had been built in the colony's 15th year by a doctor named Elia San who had come from Cape Town and had never quite stopped planning to go back. Governor Martinez received the Vorthak fleet's communication at 800 station time, 31 days after the council session. Governor Martinez, I am Commander Verktas of the Vorthak Empire. Your species has refused to acknowledge claims of honor. I am here to correct this refusal. Martinez was 63 years old and had governed the colony for 12 years. He had managed drought years and supply chain failures and one significant political dispute about water rights that had taken 2 years to resolve. He had never managed anything like the fleet of Vorthak warships currently in orbit above his planet. Commander, New Geneva is a peaceful colony. We have civilians here. Families, children. He tried to keep his voice level. Any dispute about territorial claims is a matter for the council. Surely. Negotiation has concluded, Vertas said. Your leaders chose defiance. You will see the cost of that choice. Evacuate all civilian areas. We will conduct targeted strikes on military and industrial facilities in 1 standard hour. Civilian casualties are not our objective. The next hour was the specific chaos of people who had never rehearsed for this. Families loaded into ground vehicles. The colony's 14 military personnel broadcast surrender signals. Children were moved from schools to the evacuation routes, teachers holding their hands, following the protocols that had been filed with the colonial authority and never expected to be used. The strikes were precise. The small military installation disappeared in a plasma beam that the Vorthak targeting systems delivered with 8 centuries of accumulated competence. The orbital station went cleanly. 3 industrial facilities were reduced to glowing craters that were still smoking when the targeting officer moved to the next set of coordinates. The malfunction happened at 11:47. The targeting computer on Vertas's flagship was not a cheap system. It had been maintained according to schedule. It had performed correctly in 47 previous combat operations. The shift of 3 degrees in the plasma beam's trajectory was the kind of error that happened once in several million operations, which meant that in the statistical distribution of all the operations the Vorthak Empire had conducted in 800 years of military activity, it was inevitable that it would happen exactly once. It happened at 11:47, directed at a medical facility, on a day when 847 children were inside it. Vertas stared at his tactical display for 4 seconds. Then he said very quietly, "Cease fire. All ships cease fire immediately." His targeting officer was making a sound that had no translation equivalent in any language Voss had studied. His claws were shaking. "Commander," the officer said, we struck a medical center, a facility for younglings." Vertas had fought 40 years of campaigns. He had received news of tactical reversals, of soldiers under his command dying, of operations that had not gone as planned. He had never felt what he felt in the 4 seconds between the display showing what had happened and the ceasefire order leaving his mouth. He opened the channel to Martinez. Martinez's face appeared on the display. He had been watching from the evacuation center. He had seen the building disappear. "Governor," Vertas said, "there has been a malfunction. Our weapons system failed. We struck a medical facility. This was not our objective. This was not our intention. I take full responsibility for what has occurred. We offer immediate medical assistance and full reparations." Martinez cut the channel. Vertas sat in his command chair and looked at the tactical display, and then he closed his eyes, and for a very long time he did not open them. The Galactic Council moved quickly to offer mediation. The Vorthak Empire issued a formal apology within 6 hours, the most comprehensive and unconditional apology that galactic law required, drafted by their senior diplomatic staff and delivered personally by Vertas to the council chamber. He publicly accepted full responsibility. He offered reparations that exceeded the legal requirement by a factor of 3. He stated that he would submit to whatever inquiry the council saw fit to conduct. He said that if he could trade his life for those of the children, he would do so without reservation, and every being in the chamber who knew how to read a Vorthak commander's posture understood that he meant it. Earth's embassy went silent. For 3 days, no human official made any public statement. The communications board in the embassy received calls from 47 species and returned none of them. Ambassador Voss was in her office, behind a closed door, and her staff left food outside it and did not knock. On the morning of the 4th day, she emerged. She looked the same as she always looked. She had always looked calm. She still looked calm. Her staff, who had worked with her for years, noticed something different in the quality of the calm, not the calm of someone who had processed her grief, but the calm of someone who had made a decision that had moved past the point where grief was the relevant emotion. She called her government. The call was brief. Then she called Admiral Cale Morrow, who was not a person the public communication channels had a listing for. Then she went to the council chamber and requested emergency speaking rights. The chamber was full. Every species that maintained a delegation had filled its seats. The gallery was at capacity. Speaker Valdrin floated at the center of the chamber with the careful attention of someone who was prepared to offer compassion, mediation, and whatever diplomatic pathway would move this situation toward the resolution that civilized species reached when terrible accidents happened. Voss walked to the speaking platform. She did not look small. She had never been large, but there was something about the way she occupied the space of the speaking platform that made the platform seem like the right size rather than too large for her. She looked up at the hundreds of alien faces arranged in their tiers above her, and she was quiet for a moment before she began. Earth does not accept the Vorthak Empire's apology. The chamber stirred. We acknowledge that the deaths were unintentional. We have reviewed the technical analysis of the weapon system failure, and we accept that it was a genuine malfunction. We do not believe that Commander Verktas targeted a children's hospital deliberately. She paused. None of that changes what happened. Ambassador Valdrin said carefully, the Council notes that the Vorthak Empire has offered comprehensive reparations and has accepted full institutional responsibility. Under galactic law. Under galactic law, Voss said, the matter should be closed. Yes, I know galactic law, Speaker Valdrin. I have spent my career studying it. She looked at him directly. Galactic law was written by species that have always been safe enough to treat the deaths of children as a diplomatic line item. Earth has not always been that safe. We remember what it cost not to be. The chamber was quieter than it had been. The Vorthak Empire attacked New Geneva because we would not abandon a legal claim under military threat. The attack killed 847 children. The Vorthak Empire has offered to pay money for those children's lives. Voss's voice was still even. She had worked very hard to keep it even. Earth's response is as follows. She activated the display panel at the speaking platform. The document that appeared was simultaneously translated into every language registered with the Council system. Earth hereby formally rejects the Vorthak Empire's reparations offer. We reject the premise that this matter can be resolved through diplomatic channels. And we are formally notifying this Council, and through this Council the Vorthak Empire, of our intended response. The chamber was very still. Within 30 standard days, if the Vorthak Empire has not withdrawn all claims to the 17 disputed systems and transferred formal sovereignty of those systems to Earth, along with a full accounting of military assets positioned in human space, Earth will begin military operations against the Vorthak Empire. The objectives of those operations will be as follows. She looked at the document she had spent 3 days writing. First, the complete destruction of Vorthak cultural heritage sites. Not military targets, cultural sites. The places that tell the Vorthak people who they are and where they came from. We will erase them, she paused. Second, the destruction of Vorthak military training infrastructure. Every academy, every training facility, every institution that produces the next generation of Vorthak officers. The current generation will survive. There will be no next generation. Another pause. Third, the defeat of the Vorthak military fleet in open engagement. This will establish Earth's military dominance in the region beyond reasonable dispute. She closed the document. These objectives are not proportional to what happened on New Geneva. I am aware of that. They are not intended to be proportional. They are intended to be absolute. The purpose is not retaliation. The purpose is the permanent elimination of the Vorthak Empire's capacity to threaten human children. The chamber erupted. Voss stood at the speaking platform and let it erupt, and said nothing for a long time. Ambassador Chen, Valdrin said, his energy form pulsing with something between distress and genuine alarm, this council cannot permit. Speaker Valdrin, Voss said, I am not asking for permission, I am providing notification. There is a difference. She looked around the chamber at the hundreds of faces, alien, frightened, appalled, calculating. This council failed to prevent a military attack on a human colony. This council is not equipped to enforce consequences against the Vorthak Empire for that attack. We understand that. We are not asking you to do something you cannot do. She gathered her materials. We are telling you what we are going to do. 30 days. If the Vorthak Empire withdraws, this ends. If it does not, we will begin. I want everything I have said today on the permanent record. She walked off the speaking platform. Behind her, the chamber noise had the specific quality of a room that had just heard something it did not know how to process. Not shock. The galaxy had heard ultimatums before. Something else. The specific discomfort of 200 species simultaneously calculating whether the thing they had just been told was real. Most of them concluded it was not. Humans were a minor species. They had fewer than 30 major warships in their official fleet. They had been members of the Council for 50 years and had never fought a galactic engagement. The ambassador was clearly speaking from grief. The statement would be walked back in private communications within the week. Elder Kais of the Krex said, in a private conversation with 3 other senior delegates that evening, "She means it." Nobody listened. Vertas requested the private meeting. He sent the request to Voss's office 2 days after the council session, and she accepted it without conditions, which surprised him. He had expected to negotiate the terms of the meeting before the meeting itself, which was standard diplomatic practice. She simply said, "Yes, Kepler Station, whenever you are ready." He came alone, she came alone. The conference room at Kepler Station's neutral diplomatic facility was designed for meetings between species of different sizes, which meant the furniture was wrong for both of them in different ways. Voss was sitting at the table when he arrived, which meant he had to orient himself to her position rather than establishing his own first, which she had done deliberately, and which he recognized as deliberate and acknowledged with the slight flare of his bone crests that indicated respect. "Ambassador," he said, "I want to tell you." "I know," she said, "sit down." He sat. The chair was wrong for his body, and he adjusted to it. "I want to tell you that I have submitted my formal resignation to the War Council," he said. "I am prepared to accept whatever consequences the Council deems appropriate for what happened on New Geneva. Criminal proceedings under galactic law, exile from the warrior caste, whatever is required. I take complete responsibility." "I know," Voss said again. "I read your statement." "Then you know that this was an accident. You know that I never—" "I know it was an accident," she said. "That is not in question." She activated the holographic projector she had brought with her. The image above the table was New Geneva's Colony Square, taken 3 months before the attack, a market day, families and stalls and children running between adults' legs with the specific energy of children who have been told to stay close and have not listened. 847, she said. The youngest was 2 years old. She was being treated for a respiratory infection. Routine. The kind of thing that kills children on underdeveloped worlds and is handled in a few days on a colony with a functioning medical facility. Vertas looked at the image. His bone crests were dulled in the way that Voss had learned to read as shame. The oldest was 16. He was recovering from a broken arm. He had been in the hospital for 2 days and was scheduled to be released the following morning. Ambassador Vertas said, "Please." "I need you to see them," she said, "not the number, them." She let the image run, the market square, the children, the ordinary irreplaceable specificity of a day that had happened and could not unhappen. "And I need you to understand something about humans, not what your intelligence files say. What I am telling you now directly so that there is no ambiguity." He looked at her. "We have been at war," she said, "for most of our existence. Not the kind of war that galactic species understand, organized, contained, conducted between military forces with rules of engagement and clear objectives. The other kind. The kind where the objective is survival, where you are not fighting to win territory or resources but to continue to exist at all." She showed him historical footage, not the curated version that had been filed with the Council database, but the full record, the specific unmanaged horror of a species that had spent 100,000 years in conflict with itself and every threatening thing around it. "We are 50 years into a period of peace that is the longest continuous peace in our recorded history. We have not forgotten what came before it." Vertas watched the footage with the attention of a combat veteran watching combat footage, not flinching from it but processing it, filing it, updating his assessment. "What I told the Council," Voss said, "was not grief speaking. It was not a position I will walk back in private negotiations. It is Earth's actual policy, decided by our actual government, to be executed by our actual military if the conditions I stated are not met." She deactivated the projector. "I am telling you this because you are a commander who has spent 40 years keeping your people safe. I believe you understand what that requires. I believe you understand that what I am describing is real." She paused. "I need you to make your War Council understand it." Vertas was quiet for a long time. "They will not believe me," he said finally. "I know," she said. "Tell them anyway." He looked at her across the table. He had spent 40 years reading threat assessments. He had sat across from beings that were trying to kill him and beings that were trying to negotiate with him and beings that were doing both simultaneously, and he had learned to tell the difference. "You are not bluffing," he said. "No, you are genuinely prepared to do what you described." "Yes, Earth has the capability." She did not answer that. She did not need to. "Ambassador," he said, "I will tell them. I will file a full report, and I will recommend immediate compliance with your terms. I will stake whatever remains of my reputation on the accuracy of my threat assessment." He paused, "But I want you to know something in return." She waited. "I have done terrible things in service of my empire," he said. "I have raised settlements and broken enemies and done things that I could justify by the codes of my culture and that I have never been able to stop thinking about." His bone crests moved in the slow pattern that indicated something he had no clean word for. What happened on New Geneva was not one of those things. It was the accident I described. I would give my life to undo it, and that offer is not rhetorical. He stood. "I do not expect that to change your position. I expect it changes nothing. But I wanted you to know that I am not the thing that killed those children. I am the thing that killed those children's chance to survive what was supposed to be a targeted strike on a military installation, which I never should have ordered, which I ordered because my war council told me your claim was a provocation that required a lesson." He moved toward the door. "Tell me one thing. If you can, do you think they will comply?" Voss looked at the table where the holographic projector sat, the projector she had used to show him the children of New Geneva and the history of human warfare. She thought about Drenkor's intelligence assessments. She thought about 30 years of galactic analysis that placed human military capability in the category of minimal threat. "No," she said, "I don't." He left. She sat in the conference room for a while after he was gone, looking at nothing in particular, and then she called Morrow. Admiral Cale Morrow received the call in the command facility that no galactic species knew existed, beneath a mountain range in a location that had been classified for 30 years. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, with the hands of someone who had done physical work before he had done desk work, and still sometimes missed the physical work. He had 3 grandchildren whose photographs were in a drawer rather than on his desk, because he had learned not to keep photographs on his desk in places where they could be seen by people who might read them as a vulnerability. "Ambassador," he said. Admiral Voss's voice was even. "The 30 days begin from the council session date. We have 26 days remaining." "Understood. Is everything in place?" "Everything has been in place for 23 years, Morrow said. "We update the readiness assessments every 6 months. The assets are where they need to be." The War Council will have received Veritas's report by now. "We're watching their response. Nothing suggests they're treating it seriously." "No," Voss said, "they won't." A pause. "Admiral, I want to make sure we are both operating on the same understanding of the objectives." "Go ahead." "Cultural sites, military training infrastructure, fleet engagement, in that order with that precedence." She paused, "Not population centers." "Correct. Not civilian populations." "That is the operational mandate." "I know it's the mandate. I'm asking you to tell me that you understand what that means in practice. That precision in this context does not mean 0 non-combatant casualties. That the academies contain young officers who are also, in some definitions, students. That the cultural sites are not empty buildings." Morrow was quiet for a moment. "I understand that," he said. "The operational mandate is the most precise we can make it. It is not perfect. Nothing at this scale is perfect." "I know." Another pause. "I need you to tell me that you are carrying that." "I am carrying it," Morrow said. "Good." A long pause. "So am I." The call ended. Morrow sat in the command center and looked at the operational displays that showed the positions of assets that had been maintained in readiness for 23 years. He thought about Voss's statement to the council, which he had watched on the feed in real time, and the specific quality of the silence in the chamber when she had finished. He thought about the 30 days and the 26 that remained. He thought about Veritas's report, which his intelligence staff had obtained within hours of its filing. A precise, honest, complete threat assessment from a 40-year combat veteran who had sat across from Voss and understood exactly what she was. He thought about Drenkor's response to that report, which had been a single notation in the War Council's internal file. Assessment compromised by guilt response. Recommend no action. He thought about what happened when the model was wrong, and the people using the model had 26 days to update it and chose not to. Status, he said to the room. All assets nominal, Colonel Kim replied. Ready on your order. Good, Morrow said. Let's hope we don't need them. He did not believe that, but he said it anyway because there was a version of the next 26 days where Drenkor read the report again and updated the model, and that version was better than the one he thought was coming, and he was going to give it the space it needed. The 26 days passed. The first strikes came at 300 Vorthak Standard Time, when the sacred world of Koravel was deep in its night cycle. The planet had been the spiritual center of the Vorthak civilization for 1,500 years. Its temples held the accumulated history of a culture that had been producing warriors and artists and philosophers for 2 millennia, not only warriors, though the galactic database had mostly filed only the warrior portions. The meditation centers held texts that had taken generations to produce. The monument gardens contained the names of every Vorthak who had died in service to their people, carved in the specific stone that the Vorthak believed held memory. The Great Temple held the original documents of the Vorthak Honor Code, not copies, not digital reproductions, the originals, written by hand in the script that had been used before the Vorthak had written language for their spoken tongue. High Priest Yorak was in the middle of the night's second prayer cycle when the ground shook. He looked up through the temple's crystal dome and saw light moving in the sky, not the gentle drift of spacecraft, but the hard, bright lines of objects moving at velocities that physics produced in narrow circumstances, most of them violent. He tried the communication systems, static. He tried every frequency, more static. The impacts moved across the northern continent in a pattern that he did not understand yet, and then began to understand, and the understanding was worse than the not understanding had been. The ancient library, the monument gardens, the meditation centers. Each one disappeared in a flash of light that could be seen from hundreds of kilometers away. Yorak understood, watching the pattern, that the strikes were deliberate in their selection. Not random. Not the chaos of military bombardment, but something more considered. The specific targeting of things that mattered, the choosing of the precisely wrong things to lose, the way you would choose them if you had studied what a culture was, and then worked backward from that study to what would most completely unmake it. The Great Temple's strike came last. He had just enough time to see the object falling before everything ended. Across Vorthak space, in the 6 hours that followed, 17 sacred worlds received the same precision. The Vorthak military received no engagement. Their fleets were intact. Their military infrastructure was untouched. Their population centers were untouched. Everything else was not. Drenkor received the first reports in his command center on the Vorthak homeworld, and he looked at the tactical display for a very long time before he said anything. 18 worlds, his intelligence officer said, complete destruction of all cultural and heritage sites, military assets untouched, civilian populations untouched, no demands, no communication, just the officer's claw marks on his report pad were deeper than usual, just this. Drenkor looked at the display. He had been a warrior for 60 years. He had studied every major conflict in galactic history. He had a framework for understanding why species did what they did in war, because war had structures, and structures had logic, and logic was something that could be navigated if you understood it well enough. He did not have a framework for this. What about our defensive fleets? Untouched, the attackers avoided all military installations with another hesitation, with what appears to be deliberate routing. They could have engaged our fleets and chose not to. They chose not to, Drenkor said slowly. Yes. He thought about Verktas's report, the report he had dismissed because the threat assessment was emotionally compromised. The report that had said, in language he was now reviewing in his memory with the specific attention of a man who had made a catastrophic error. She means it. The ambassador means exactly what she said. This is not grief. This is policy. A communication activated. Text only in perfect Vorthak script. You killed 847 of our children. We have destroyed 847 of your most sacred sites. This is not the end. This is the warning that we gave you 30 days to act on. You had the opportunity to prevent this. You chose not to take it. We are giving you one more opportunity. Withdraw from the disputed systems within 72 hours and transfer sovereignty as demanded. After 72 hours, we will begin Phase 2. The communication ended. Drenkor sat in the silence of his command center and thought about the children who had died on New Geneva, who were the reason this was happening, and the sacred worlds that had just been destroyed, and the 72 hours he had been given. He thought about Virtas. He thought about the word, she means it. He issued mobilization orders. He contacted the Galactic Council. He did the things that a war leader did when his empire was under attack, because the war leader's instinct was to respond with force, and he was a war leader, and his instincts were the product of 60 years of combat experience. But underneath the orders, in the part of himself that had survived 60 years of combat by being honest about the things that mattered, he was doing a different calculation. The Vorthak Empire had a fleet of 3,000 ships. They had never lost a major fleet engagement. They had 8 centuries of military operational excellence. The humans had attacked 18 worlds simultaneously, with the precision to destroy cultural sites without harming adjacent civilian buildings, using technology that his sensors had not detected on approach, and had then disappeared back into space without leaving a trace that his most sophisticated tracking systems could identify. His model had been wrong. He had been told his model was wrong. He had chosen not to update it. He had 72 hours. The military academies came next. Captain Myra Valdek led one of 40 human special operations teams inserted into Vorthak's space in the 48 hours before the Phase 2 activation. She was 34 years old, and she had read the operational mandate 3 times before accepting the assignment, and she had asked the question that was available to ask. What about the students who aren't military yet? The answer had been, they are in a military facility being trained for military service. The mandate is the mandate. She had accepted the assignment. She was a soldier and the mandate was the mandate, and she understood what that meant and she had accepted it, and she did not feel clean about accepting it, and she did the job anyway. The Vorthak Naval Academy on Gark had been producing officers for 800 years. The buildings were the specific red stone of traditional Vorthak construction, well-maintained, with the kind of care given to things that were intended to last. Thousands of young Vorthak came here each year to learn what it meant to lead, which was not only military leadership. The curriculum included history, philosophy, the honor codes that had governed Vorthak society for 2,000 years. It was not only a weapons factory. Valdek had read the intelligence file. She knew it was not only a weapons factory. The neutron devices were designed to kill living things while leaving structures intact. She pressed the activation sequence. There were no explosions. The lights stayed on. The buildings remained. The computer systems continued their overnight processing cycles. Everything inside was dead. Valdek and her team evacuated through the tunnels they had entered through. She did not look back at the buildings. She had learned, somewhere in her training, that looking back was something you did when you were still deciding whether the thing you had done was the thing you should have done. And she had made that decision before she came in. And she was not going to revisit it now because revisiting it now was not the same as processing it properly, and she would process it properly later. 40 facilities, 40 teams. By morning, the Vorthak Empire's military training capacity had been reduced by 97%. Morrow received the completion report at 600. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, Phase 3 on schedule. The fleet engagement above Korath lasted 2 hours. Drenkor's home fleet was the pride of the Vorthak Empire, the ships that had never been defeated, the crews that had trained for a lifetime, the tactical doctrine that had held for 8 centuries. They met the human fleet at the edge of the system with everything they had. The human ships were faster. They were more maneuverable. They had been designed according to principles that the Vorthak tactical database had no entry for, not because the principles were new, but because the principles were old in a way that galactic species had evolved past and humans had not. Humans did not fight to demonstrate superior force in hope of encouraging surrender. They fought to end the fight. 2 hours, then debris. Admiral Lisa Morrow, no relation to Kale, though the coincidence had been noted and was about to be noted again by the galaxy at large, opened communications from the bridge of the flagship. Drenkor appeared on the display. He had aged in ways that were not purely physical in the 72 hours since the first strikes. War leader, she said, you have a choice. Surrender unconditionally all claims to the disputed systems, full transfer of sovereignty as demanded, all military assets in human space stood down, or we begin strikes on Korath's population centers. She hated saying it. She said it because it was what the operational mandate required, and because the mandate existed for a reason, and because the threat had to be real to function as a threat, and because none of that made her feel clean about saying it. Drenkor looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the tactical display showing what remained of his fleet. He looked at the planet visible through the command center's viewport, his planet, his people, the civilians who had not made the decisions that had brought 60 years of galactic stability to this point, and who were going to pay for those decisions if he chose wrongly. The Vorthak Empire surrenders, he said. Unconditionally, please spare the civilians. The civilians were always going to be spared, Lisa Morrow said. That was never in question. She ended the communication. She sat in the command chair of the flagship and looked at the tactical display that showed the destroyed Vorthak fleet and the intact planet and the history of the last 72 hours laid out in coordinate data and operational timestamps. And she thought about the mandate and the people who had executed it and the specific weight of doing a terrible thing correctly. She filed her after-action report. She noted the civilian casualty count, 0 from human operations. She noted the combat casualty count from the fleet engagement. She noted the casualty counts from the academies, which the mandate classified differently, and which she classified in her personal log the same way she classified the fleet engagement, because they were still people, because the mandate's categories were operational categories and not moral ones. She sent the report to Kale Morrow. He read it and did not respond for several hours. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the specific chaos of 200 species that had spent 4 days watching something they did not have a framework for. The Vorthak Empire no longer existed as a military or political entity. Its fleet was debris. Its cultural heritage was radioactive craters. Its military training infrastructure was empty buildings on worlds that had been visited by teams that left no trace. Its refugee ships were scattered across neutral space with people who had not been harmed physically and had lost everything else. Voss walked into the chamber. She looked the same as she always looked. She looked calm in the way she had always looked calm. Her staff, watching from the human section, thought that she looked like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and was not going to put it down yet because there was still somewhere to carry it to. Speaker Valdrin floated at the center. He looked older, 3,000 years of life, and he had never looked older until now. The Council recognizes Ambassador Voss of Earth. She walked to the speaking platform. You want to know why, she said. I understand that, I will tell you. The chamber was quiet. The Vorthak Empire attacked a human colony. They killed 847 children. They offered reparations. Galactic law says that should have closed the matter. She paused. Galactic law was written by species that have always been safe enough to treat the deaths of children as something that can be compensated. We have not always been safe. We remember the cost of not being safe. She looked around the chamber. But I am not going to stand here and tell you that what we did was proportional. It was not. I am not going to tell you that it was just in the conventional sense. I am not certain that it was. The chamber stirred. This was not what anyone had expected. What I am going to tell you is what it was. It was a deterrent, not a response. A deterrent. She activated the display. The Vorthak Empire's cultural heritage is gone. Its military training capacity is gone. It will take decades to rebuild, and it will never be what it was. Every species in this council is watching this chamber right now and calculating what would happen if they made the decision that the Vorthak War Council made, which was to receive a clear and specific warning, with 30 days to act on it, and to dismiss that warning as emotionally compromised analysis. She paused. That calculation is the deterrent. That is what we built, not a monument, not a memorial in stone, a certainty. Ambassador Voss, said Councillor Vexthai of the Aquatic Coalition, 800 children died on New Geneva. How many Vorthak personnel died in your operations? I will not give you a number that makes this feel like a ledger, Voss said. People died. The military academies were not empty. The cultural sites were not empty. Precision is not the same as perfect. We did what we could to limit non-combatant casualties, and we did not eliminate them, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. Then you have committed the same crime you punished the Vorthak for, said Ambassador Thexar of the Zephyrian hegemony. Voss looked at him for a long moment. No, she said, we committed a different crime. The Vorthak killed children in an accident. We killed combatants and a number of people adjacent to military infrastructure with deliberate intent. In response to a warning we issued clearly and gave 30 days to be acted on. She paused. That is not the same crime. It is a different crime. I am not asking you to approve of it. I am asking you to understand the difference. Do you understand the difference? Thexar asked. The question was not hostile, it was genuine. Voss looked at the floor for a moment, then she looked up. Yes, she said, I understand it and I carry it and I will carry it for the rest of my life. She paused. I also carry the understanding that the deterrent is real. The 847 children who died on New Geneva are the reason the next children's hospital that a Vorthak weapon comes near will not be destroyed. Not because the Vorthak are better people, because no species in this council can now afford the operational cost of harming human children. A long pause. I do not know if that is worth what it cost. I do not think I am the right person to answer that question. I think the people who lost children on New Geneva are the right people to answer it, and I think their answers would not all be the same. The chamber was very quiet. Earth is prepared to present a framework for a new mutual protection agreement, Voss continued. Not a document that establishes human dominance. A document that establishes shared obligation. Every species that signs commits to the protection of every other species' civilian population, with Earth as the enforcement mechanism for violations. She paused. The enforcement is real. You have seen that it is real, but the obligation is also real. Earth will be bound by it as much as anyone else. She looked around the chamber. Any harm to human children will be met with what you have seen. Any harm to the children of species under this agreement will be met with the same response. That is not a threat. It is a guarantee. There is a difference. Thexar rose. The Zephyrian hegemony will ask for 3 days to review the framework before voting. 3 days is reasonable, Voss said. She walked off the speaking platform. She did not look triumphant. She looked like someone who had done what needed to be done and was now going to spend a long time thinking about what needed to be done had cost. The vote came 3 days later. 197 in favor, 0 opposed, 3 abstentions from species that had always preferred independence. Voss sat in the human section and watched the tally and did not feel what she had expected to feel, which was relief. She felt something more complicated, the specific weight of a thing completed that could not be uncompleted. The knowledge that the galaxy she would walk out of this chamber into was permanently different from the galaxy she had walked into 9 years ago, when she had first taken her seat in the small human section below the crystal dome. She thought about Verktas, who had been right about the threat and had said so and had not been believed, and who was somewhere in the Vorthak refugee fleet now, in a ship that was carrying the surviving members of a culture that had existed for 2,000 years and would not exist in the same form again. She thought about Morrow, who was in a command center beneath a mountain, looking at operational data. She thought about the 847 names that had been added to the memorial wall outside the chamber's main entrance, carved by human hands into the council's wall, which had required a vote that had passed without debate because there was nothing to debate about the carving of children's names. She thought about what it had cost to make those names into a deterrent rather than a tragedy. She did not resolve that question, she sat with it. Morrow received the vote result in his command center. He sat with it for a while. Then he pulled up the operational data from the past week, the complete record of Operation Memorial, from the first cultural site strikes to the fleet engagement to the final casualty tallies. And he looked at it with the attention of someone who had built something and needed to understand exactly what he had built. The deterrent was real, he knew that. Species across the galaxy were calculating the cost of harming human children and arriving at a number that was not payable. That was real. The protection it produced was real. The people who had died in the academies were also real. He knew their names, not personally, but from the intelligence reports, the head counts, the specific records of a military operation conducted with the precision available to them. Young officers, instructors, people who had been in a building that was a legitimate military target under the operational mandate and who were dead because of decisions made by their war council and by his government and by him. He had not targeted them the way the Vorthak targeting computer had accidentally targeted the hospital. He had targeted them deliberately. because they were in a facility that was a legitimate military objective, and because destroying military training capacity was part of the operational mandate, and because the operational mandate had been authorized by a civilian government that had issued a clear warning and given 30 days for it to be acted on. All of that was true. They were still dead. He thought about Voss in the council chamber, saying, "I carry it. I will carry it for the rest of my life." He thought about his grandchildren's photographs in the drawer. He pulled them out, he looked at them for a while, then he put them back. He filed his final operational report. He noted the completion of all objectives. He noted the civilian casualty count. He noted the military casualty count. He noted that the deterrent had been established and was functioning as designed. He wrote at the end of the report, in the section marked Commander's Assessment, Operation Memorial achieved its stated objectives. The deterrent is real. The cost was real. Both things are true simultaneously, and I do not believe that the truth of one cancels the truth of the other. I am recommending a full operational review to be conducted by an independent body with complete access to all classified materials. The decisions that produced this operation deserve more scrutiny than the decisions that produce ordinary operations, and the people who made them, including me, should be willing to submit to that scrutiny. The children of New Geneva are still dead. The people who died in the academies are still dead. The Vorthak cultural heritage is still gone. The deterrent exists. I do not know if the first three things were worth the fourth. I do not think I am the right person to answer that. I think we should be honest about the fact that someone should. He submitted the report. He looked at the operational displays for a while longer, and then he turned them off, and he sat in the dark command center beneath the mountain and thought about what had been built in the past week, and what the building of it had cost, and whether cost and worth were the same question or different ones. He did not arrive at an answer. He did not think he was supposed to. The memorial wall stood at the entrance to the Galactic Council Chamber. 847 names in stone. Voss stood before it on the morning after the vote. She had come alone, before the chamber's official opening hours, in the specific quiet of a building that had not yet filled with the noise of its function. She looked at the names. She knew some of them not personally, but from the case files, the background reports, the documentation of lives that had existed and did not anymore. The 2-year-old with the respiratory infection, the 16-year-old with the broken arm, the doctors who had been on duty, the parents who had been visiting. She had built a deterrent from their deaths. That was what she had done. She had taken 847 deaths and made them into a guarantee, not a guarantee that those 847 people had not died for nothing, which was a different thing and not something she could offer, but a guarantee that the mechanism of their deaths would never be repeated, because the cost of repeating it was now understood by everyone with the capacity to repeat it. She did not know if that was worth it. She had said so in the chamber, and she had meant it, and she still meant it. She thought about what Vertas had said in the conference room at Kepler Station. "I am not the thing that killed those children." And she thought about what she had not said in response, which was, "I know. And now I am something I wasn't before, and I don't know what to call it, and I'm not sure the name matters as much as the carrying." She stood before the wall until the chamber's staff began arriving for the day. Then she turned and walked back into the building that held the new order, imperfect, costly, built from things that could not be unbuilt, and she went to work. Because the work was not finished. It was never finished. The work was what you did when you had made the decisions that were available to make and were still standing afterward, and had not arrived at peace with them, and were not going to arrive at peace with them, and were going to keep doing the work anyway. That was what it meant to carry it. She carried it.